to, someone from an Arab-speaking country, or even, West African country, you go to Senegal or Gambia, if you go to, Bahrain, or even Indonesia, and you say, well, who was the first person that took Shahada in your family? They would say, most people say, I don't know. I think I heard a story about them, because Islam's been in their families for hundreds of years. In some cases, 1,000 years. Nobody thinks about the first person who took Shahada. And as a convert myself, you think you want that day to come where Islam is so ingrained in your family that people say, yeah, I don't really know, who. I know somebody. I don't really know. I know their name. I don't know their situation. That's what you ideally want. That it to be so ingrained in your family that they say, well, we've always been Muslim. That's all we know. So, alhamdulillah, tonight we have, Sister Karen Hadley. We have our Arizona crew here. We have Sister Karen Hadley, who's the matriarch, who starts this. And inshallah, we have, Sister Marcy Hadley Mayrell. Am I pronouncing that correctly? If I'm not, you can correct me.
It's just Meryl.
Meryl. Oh, subhanAllah.
Yeah.
Meryl. And our sister, our third generation, Sister Aisha Meryl. Right? Okay, alhamdulillah. So we wanted to just talk about, have a conversation. And if anyone is, if you want to ask questions, just put them in the chat box, inshallah. And we may have some time where we can kind of maybe open things up. We just wanted to start off with a few questions for our Sister Karen. If you could tell us about your conversion, as much as you would like to share about when you converted to Islam.
My husband converted first. He was the one who was searching for a new path. He was raised Catholic. In 1982, he took a job in Saudi Arabia. We didn't know what a Muslim was. We just went there because he could make some good money. But while we were there, a coworker gave him a translation of the Quran, and he read it. And I can remember him reading passages and just saying, wow, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. This is it. And so he converted. And then we had, Marcy was only 2 when we went. We had another daughter while we were there. We decided we didn't really want to stay in Saudi Arabia. I didn't like their politics there and how the women were treated. So we came back to Arizona. But, when you have converts, a lot of times they're very gung-ho in the beginning. And I could tell that I needed to study Islam to decide for myself what my path was going to be. I was raised, we didn't go to church much. We went a few times. But being American, I saw the movies about Jesus, and I believed in God, and I believed, as a lot of Americans do, that if you're a good person, that's all that should matter. But we were very blessed. My husband, somehow, with God's help, came upon a group of people who were getting together and having halakas every couple weeks with their families. And this consisted of our good friend Anissa and her husband, and Zarina, who's on here today, Frida, Sylvia, just a mishmash of different ethnicities. And one person would pick a subject and talk about it. And nobody was a sheikh, nobody was an imam. The families, the kids got to play together. And I just learned the basics of Islam that way. And I realized that I thought to myself, why did God give us these books if he didn't expect us to do something? We're supposed to follow something, not just go through life thinking, well, I'm a good person. So in 1986, I converted. And it was great. Converting to Islam was the best thing that happened to our family. My husband and I were married 10 years before he converted. Now our families, some of them handled it better than others. I think that was one of the questions that you wanted me to answer. My family, my father, my stepmother, they were very accommodating. When we would visit them, they would cook fish instead of meat, because this was in the 80s. It wasn't easy to get anything halal. And they put up with it. Now, once in a while, my father would make a comment, and I would realize he thought we were a little strange. We started covering. We had to go pray 5 times a day, that type of thing. But they were accommodating. Now, my husband's father, he got to the point where he kind of disowned our family. But there were some other things going on there too. But on the whole, our families were very accepting of our conversion to Islam.
What was one of your biggest? I appreciate the story, alhamdulillah. What was one of your biggest challenges when you converted?
Well, there's a lot of things as an American that are challenging. You want to go to a movie? Oh, no, it's prayer time. You want to, when you travel, we must have prayed just about everywhere. We prayed with snow boots on up in the mountains. We prayed at Disneyland. We prayed a lot of different places. And, there's not mosques on every corner like in many countries. We tried to eat halal, and in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't easy to find halal meat. We had friends who would go to California. They'd bring the meat and go, "It's time to come get the meat. Come on, hurry, get over here." So we ate a lot of fish and tuna and things like that.
I think I just want to interject.
We did go.
One thing that was really interesting about my dad with prayer, like now we have a lot of people are very concerned about safety and all of that, but this was 80s 90s before 9/11, and you'd be in the middle of Disneyland. He's like, "It's time to pray." Like, "Okay, Dad, but we're in the middle of the walkway, like, can we at least move over?" "I don't know, it seems like a good spot to me." So he kind of really helped us to get pretty comfortable in praying for just about anywhere. That was something pretty interesting about him.
As for any other, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges. Wearing hijab, a lot of people didn't really, know what Muslims were here in the United States either. We did have the Gulf War and different things, but it wasn't a common thing, especially in East Mesa, where we live and still do. But my attitude has always been that if you feel that it's normal, other people will too. And that really does help a lot. When you don't go out of the house thinking people are going to attack you or feel that you're, strange, then generally they treat you normally.
So let me ask you a question. Marcy, what were some of your challenges growing up Muslim? So being second generation, like the child of converts, what are some things that you were challenged with?
One of the biggest things for me, I think, as a child was like that feeling of belonging, because I did have 2 Caucasian parents, or converts. A lot of times kids I would meet, they would have one parent that was maybe a convert, but not the other one. So we didn't really have, aside from our amazing group that you were talking about, Mom, with the Halakha group and all of our friends, they're on here today. Hello, everyone. There was, as a community, a larger community, you just didn't feel like you belonged because there was nobody like you. There was just nobody just like you. So I think that was one of the major challenges that I saw growing up. I can see it now that kind of everybody feels that about themselves now that I'm older, but I think as a child, that's how I felt.
So you're talking about the little group. Your mother was speaking about the group,
Yeah.
the community. So it would be said, and the community means a lot to you all.
Mm-hmm.
What are some challenges that you've seen in raising your daughter, Aisha? So that was a challenge. Yours was belonging. What do you see with Aisha? Before we ask, what are the challenges you see in parenting her as a third generation, Muslim?
I mean, I don't know if there really are uniquely to being third generation or just, challenges that every parent faces, with your kids want to do things that you may not agree with, and, letting them really explore and letting them kind of have a little bit of that freedom. It's always like, how much freedom, how much are we going to allow here? And I mean, one thing that I know that I've always tried to do with my kids is no questions wrong, like just ask. And I'm not going to be upset. Like, I mean, I would say that probably every one of my children, when they were little, at some point said, when I grow up, I'm going to be Christian. And, just because, Christmas sounded fun and, all different kinds of things that our society portrays as Christian that look fun. And I wouldn't freak out and tell them, oh my gosh, I'd be like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Do you want to know what Christians believe? Let's talk about what Christians believe. And then we'd get into it and they're like, oh, no, I don't believe that. Like, okay, well, that's what they believe. And then we, have those discussions. So just making sure that, I mean, they ask some really intense things sometimes and they come up with some very interesting conversations, but, no questions taboo. Like, ask it. Let's talk about it. Let's explore. Let's really have those discussions. And I think, I was very blessed because I grew up, I was homeschooled my whole life. So we were a very tight-knit family. And we got the habit of praying together, and the habit of praying 5 times a day was very ingrained as a child. And seeing the struggles that many Muslims have with just completing their prayers, I appreciate my parents instilling that habit with me. And that's something we try to do with our kids too, is try to pray at least a couple prayers together every day. To kind of just make sure that they as well, because it's just amazing how many people struggle that I hear, and I just don't want, you're going to have so many things to struggle with. Let's not have that be another struggle. And another thing that we used to have great stories that my dad would tell, or we'd have question time, after prayer, we'd all sit and just talk about whatever. And I find that my kids do the same thing. We're lining up for prayer and one person will say a question and 30 minutes later, we finally get to pray because we've had a whole discussion that wouldn't have happened if we didn't come together at that moment. So
one thing I'd like to say about the homeschooling, both my husband and I went to public school, and we decided that, if we wanted our girls to wear hijab, we thought it would be easier for them if we homeschooled. And that, this started in the late 80s. So it wasn't something a lot of people did. It was kind of a new thing. But one thing that really helped our girls was that Sister Anissa, we started a youth group for girls. And that gave them the camaraderie of being together with girls of their own age. And also, I think one thing about community, when you're around other people, then you want to emulate them. If you're never around other Muslims, you're not going to emulate Muslims. You're going to emulate. I mean, I don't have a problem with your friends having friends who are non-Muslim, but the majority has to be, you surround yourself with Muslims,
Speaking to that though, Mom, like I have found it's hard for like my son who is 15, that's one of his challenges. He doesn't have Muslim friends. And I mean, both of my boys don't at this point. And it is a little bit harder because you do get a lot of the culture in there and they don't feel that they relate. And so they haven't found those people that they really click with. And the people that they're clicking with more are their non-Muslim peers. And my kids, like my son did go to high school for the first time last year because he wanted to do it. I was like, I don't know that we should do that, but he wanted the experience. And now he was like, Mom, I need to get out of here. Like, I can't take another year of that. So my daughter Aisha, she went to college instead of high school. And so he's going to do that now as well. But yeah, he got the experience, and for good or bad, that's what it is. But I'd say that is a big challenge for my boys, and even for Aisha. She had the challenge for a while until she kind of found her group that she clicks with. And
do you think, with young men, it is definitely a challenge. For a while, communally, we really focused on girls and really put, understandably so. I have 4 daughters myself. So, and my son, I have 1 son. So community, working in the community, working in the schools, you see a lot of emphasis put on the girls. And the boys were almost like, Dr. Leonard Sax's book, Boys Adrift. The boys kind of just floated. And as long as they weren't getting in too much trouble, it was okay for them to, hang out a little longer than girls, do some things that we never would allow girls to do. Right. One thing I think of today, it's almost like during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when they buried the girls alive because they had no use for them. In some senses, we give a message to young men: we don't have a use for you. Communally. Yeah. A lot of them say, like, what am I supposed to do? Communally. What am I supposed to, like, classes, things like that, like they're more girl-centered. You go to classes, they're full, all the classes are full of young ladies. And that's a great thing. For young men, there's this kind of just floating off that I don't think we've had a discussion about communally. How do we retain our young men? Because if the girls are sound and there's no one to marry, we're still in a place. You know what I'm saying? So
one thing we found, the biggest issue was that at a certain point, the mothers cannot do a youth group for the boys. And we had a struggle getting the fathers to commit to being there for the boys. We couldn't get that in place because once they're a certain age, we can't do it. The men have to do it.
Well, and the men to that point, we saw the same thing happening here in our community. And so, I'm a part of an organization called Good Tree Institute, and we decided that we were going to have co-ed events so that we could make sure that our boys had something as well as the girls. And so we do like a monthly kind of get together, and they'll be, depending on the topic, the boys and girls may split up, to talk about it. But what we have brought in were college mentors. So we bring in the younger college age people as their mentors to these teens. And that kind of helps to facilitate. So we have big camps that we put on, not right now because of COVID, but where the guys, the teenage boys have mentors that they can kind of talk to and relate to and spend the weekend and build that bond. And so, it's in its baby stages, it's still kind of, but that's something that we're trying to fill that void because it's so true.
Inshallah. So, Aisha, Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
How you doing?
Good. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. All right. So tell me what are some of your challenges? So we hear, about your grandmother's challenges are, trying to get some halal food, trying to get, more indigenous, like a community of people together. So we make sure it's passed down to the kids, the second generation. Your mother had, their challenges of identity and finding people, who they can relate to. What's your challenge?
I think it's similar to what my mom was saying with the identity concept, because in masjids and Sunday schools, you don't really have a place. And I didn't grow up going to the masjid because of those reasons, because there wasn't, like my mom didn't have great experiences. There wasn't that community aspect where we really felt supported. So I wasn't brought up in that. And then when I was in it, it was awkward. You couldn't really find people to connect to because it was like, okay, I'm not Arab, I'm not Desi, I'm not this, I'm not that. So you kind of grow up in this mindset of I'm not Muslim enough because I don't fit into the culture. And then when, should I keep talking? I think something like
We lost
something
Malik.
out.
Yeah, we lost Malik. I would say
Yeah.
keep talking. Sabria's here. Letitia's here.
Okay.
Talking.
Okay, got it. So it's trying to fit in of where do I still hold on to my culture because I'm still Muslim, but I might not fit into another person's culture. And then understanding how much, especially in our communities, how much different cultures then infiltrate what religion is. And so it's trying to decipher, okay, what is true Islam and what has been passed down and just kind of understood as, well, this is our culture, so just do it. And people understand it as Islam. So where can we have that differentiation so that we can really be clear on what am I standing for? Because I think another thing that I struggled with a little bit and that I do see in our communities is really being responsible for our Muslim identity and understanding what that means. Because if we grow up in a world where we don't have the best representations of what a Muslim is, or even in our communities where we don't have that tight-knit bond with the elders of the communities or our different peers, then we kind of don't know what does this look like and what is a good representation of this if we don't have the education that's standing for creating that space where it's I'm responsible for being Muslim. Because then we have people who are like, well, it just seems like it's a lot of rules and I don't understand what it is, and you can't really take it on as yourself. And so for me, when I really was able to get to a place where I learned, okay, this is what Islam is, this is what our aqidah is and our creed, and understanding this is what our Quran says, this is what our prophet taught, and then being like, okay, yeah, that 100% makes sense. Like there's no way it doesn't. Then I can really be like, I'm Muslim and this is what I'm taking on. And before, that's kind of where I feel like the gap is when I was growing up, because it was just like, okay, memorize some surahs, learn how to read, and that's it. Maybe learn a story or two, but not really understand how that applies to our lives and how can I take the Quran as like my handbook or as a part of who I get to be and how I get to be guided through life. And then how do I relate to people? Because that's a big thing too of, okay, if I'm in Muslim spaces, it's all talked about as, okay, my American friends. And I'm like, but I'm here. But you mean non-Muslim, right? When they're talking about all the things that they deal with in the world, instead of, okay, where do I fit? Because then we're also getting to the conversation of, well, we also have now it's, okay, I'm Palestinian American and I'm Pakistani American and I'm all these things, which is awesome and amazing. But then when you're like, but I don't got another one. Like I only got the one adjective. And so I don't know where I go and I don't know what I do because I don't have the space. Like it was when I was at Island last year, one of the participants who was an older gentleman came up to me. He was like, I heard there was a white girl here. Like I had to meet you. Like there was like, this is not a thing. And then I went through my story of like, oh yeah, my grandparents converted. And he just was like jaw dropping. Like, how do you exist? And that's kind of been my whole life of you don't happen. Like everyone's like, oh, you're Turkish or you're Saudi or you're this, when they're like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from here. Like, I don't got anything else. Like, I really don't know. I maybe like English at some point, but I have no connection to like a lineage thing. I've just been here forever. And so it's just very interesting to navigate that space. And like, alhamdulillah, like we're trying to, especially in like Arizona community, and I've seen like in other communities when I was in Chicago, like there are strides being made in having spaces that there are people that are doing this. There are people who are third generations or second generation, or just kind of understanding, like growing up, it seems like, oh, all Muslims are Arab and that's all we got. And then understanding, like, if you actually look at it on a worldwide perspective, and even if you look at it from our country, that's not true. And there's that's just a subset, and it's a great subset, but there's so many other things. We have so many scholars of different ethnicities and different backgrounds and everything that we can take from, and just finding those people that you really connect to, and then finding that community on a bigger level, and then even just finding communities in yourself of finding people who you can relate to. And I think that was the biggest discrepancy growing up, because it was just, there was the language barrier or the cultural barrier, or even like, okay, I don't get clothes from sent home from other countries, so I just look different, which, and especially in our communities, that's just not really always accepted. And it's not like it's unaccepted, but it's just like, they're not gonna like come and like bring me in and like really try to get me all comfy and stuff. It's just kind of like, oh, you're here, good for you, we'll see if this works. So I think that's pretty much the sum of it, if all of that makes sense. I don't even know where I came from at this point.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. You did a great job. It's a great job of explaining, because that is the situation for a lot of, generational the children of indigenous Americans. Often we don't, even indigenous Americans don't like to have that conversation, because it seems like you're dividing something. But if you're an American, at the end of the day, your family is rooted here. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, if Islam's going to get rootedness in America, it's going to have to begin to indigenize, or
Exactly.
it'll see it as something foreign.
Yeah, and I think for me, understanding how much that Islamic history is ingrained in American history, or understanding like how much it's not new, or understanding just Islamic history in America, and understanding how far that goes back and how much that affects our community now. Just learning about how the nation was set up and how does that affect us now? How is it when immigration was happening and everyone was moving, or how does it affect us now? Because then we get to understand our communities better and understand, okay, this is why people are the way that they are, and not, okay, they're just nuts. And how do we get to deal with that? And I think with my mom was saying, like, how I've grown up, like, you ask your questions. And that's a part of our religion, but it's not necessarily a part of our community. And because it's sad, but a lot of Muslims don't want to have those conversations because they don't know the answers, or they're not strong enough in their faith to always answer those questions. And I'm that type of person that wants to answer all the questions and ask all the questions and be like, if I won't get offended you asking anything, or I won't be uncomfortable, because if I get uncomfortable, that means that I'm not settled with something and I need to go settle it out. So thank you for opening that access for me to go and figure that out, or seek that knowledge that I don't have. And then having conversation with people who aren't Muslim, just, you're like, oh, there might be things that, like, especially living in a Christian dominant country, there's a lot of things that Muslims will even kind of just automatically take on sometimes in our communities of like, we believe, and you're like, wait, we don't got that, or like that's just kind of different, or things that we just assumed. But starting to open up those conversations, see what everyone knows and what everyone believes, and then we can understand each other better, and then just be solid in ourselves, so then we can move forward strongly.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Shout out to those homeschool mothers. Shout out to the homeschoolers. I had a question for Sister Karen. How is it being a grandmother, a Muslim grandmother? Because often, you don't have a grandparent, who's Muslim, even a parent. But you're a grandparent who's Muslim, who has Muslim grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Are you able to, they say grandparents actually can pull back a little bit and be a little softer on their grandkids than they were on their kids? I guess that's a question for Sister Marcy.
My dad's totally that way.
What's that?
The things that come out of my father's mouth, I'm like, excuse me, we would have never. He's like, oh, you have to be easy with them. You have to. I'm like, what?
I think being a grandparent, it doesn't really matter if you're Muslim or non-Muslim. It's a wonderful thing to be. You can watch your grandkids grow up, and you can have the best part of them and not have to discipline them. And you know, I guess because I wasn't raised Muslim, they don't come to me with questions about Islam. You know, that's really not my role. They see me, they know I'm Muslim, and they know I believe in God and in the Quran and Prophet Muhammad. And it was funny, one time I came over to Marcy's to help me with my Arabic, because I'm taking Arabic classes from Goodtree. And Aaron, my grandson, says, "Why are you helping grandma with her Arabic?" I said, "Well, she knows more than me." But I think I saw. Yeah.
And she should know more. I tell my kids, you should know more than me.
Yeah.
Like, you got to start. You know what I'm saying? You started from the time you were a baby. you got a head start.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, we tried to, I couldn't teach them Arabic, obviously, but we tried to give them the opportunities, you know, to do that.
So we have a question. How close is your relationship with your non-Muslim relatives? I mean, you said it started off, they were, you know, pretty open.
Yeah.
Your husband, his family wasn't, you know, his father wasn't as open, but there may have been somebody else. But as of today, like, how have you seen that evolve?
Well, we don't have a huge family. That probably helped in some ways. So here in Arizona, when the kids were little, they had some cousins who lived in the valley also. And it just got to the point where we would celebrate Thanksgiving. So we would have them over to our house most of the time. And they were very accommodating. They loved coming. And I think one of the things that made them love it so much is there was no alcohol. My husband's family is prone to alcoholism. And so, you know, when you don't have alcohol in the mix, a lot of times the whole day is just really pleasant. So they always enjoyed coming to our house. But they were pretty good. If we went to their homes, there wasn't a lot of drinking. There wasn't, you know, confrontation, that type of thing. And when we would go to Washington to visit my parents, we stayed with them. And it was the same thing. Everybody was very accommodating. You know, we didn't have a lot of issues in our family that flared up during holidays and things like that. So we were blessed. Now, my husband's father, he wanted my oldest son to spend 2 weeks with him alone when he was about 10. And that's when my husband had to tell him that it wasn't going to happen because he was an alcoholic. And that's when he broke ties with the family, because he said we chose Islam over him. But we just chose to protect our children. You know, my husband said he would come too, but he wasn't going to let him go alone. And he told him, he said, "Dad, who gave you your first drink?" He said, "My grandfather." He said, "Well, so did mine." So that was sad. He cut the family off, and it was his loss, really. But that only happened with him. The rest of the family was great. But like I say, we don't have a huge extended family.
Well, and I think too, because I actually married a convert. And so my husband's mother was Mormon when we got married. And, you know, one thing that she was, my husband is her only child. So we actually, went and spent time with her on her holidays. And the kids knew that that was grandma's holiday, you know, Christmas, Easter, those kinds of things. And even growing up, my grandmother and my father's mother would have the whole family over for those big holidays as well. And we always were able to go, and we cherished them, you know, getting together with the family. But we always knew that was their holiday, and we would invite them to our holiday. So my mother-in-law would come to eat prayer with us, and she'd come and celebrate with the kids. But we just, you know, we got to keep those ties And the kids just, and it was kind of fun. Like for me, it was fun to help grandma, put the tree up and in those kinds of things. So you kind of got to experience what Christmas was like a little bit without celebrating it as your holiday. But we just made those decisions as a family because, for one, my mother-in-law didn't have anybody else to celebrate with. And with my grandma, I think it just helped to keep those family ties. You weren't saying, oh, you're horrible and we can't do anything that you do. No, like, let's experience your holiday and you experience our holiday. So that's just a way that we chose to handle that.
No, that's a good thing because, as a convert, or converts generally kind of struggle with how far do you go? How far do you give in? How far do you pull back to protect your kids? And it's good for people to talk about these, people finding these balances so we can get best practices. Because I've seen people, we really destroy relationships sometimes. And when you're just trying to find your footing in the religion, and you may cut off family ties over something, really, really that you look back, maybe a decade later, and that may have been a little trivial. On either side, sometimes people realize like, man, I was really, doing a lot about I made a big deal about someone's conversion, and it's not that they've changed as a person. Their ethics and morality may have changed, but their essence, that they're still my blood. So no, it's a good. Thank you for that.
Well,
we have a question.
Oh, just one thing, Brother Malik, just to say what you were. I think it's also important, like, how are our families or our communities going to get to know who we are as Muslims if we don't go out and be with them? And I'm not saying we drink with them and all that stuff, but, like, participate as much as you can participate. And then they get to see who you are. They get to see the values your kids have, and how you interact. So I agree with you. I think it's really important.
And particularly because a lot of times the convert family is the stable family. As American families have kind of regressed, oftentimes the convert family is the most stable family in the family.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't pull away from it because this is your family. These are your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, your uncles, your aunties. So we have a question. It says, how does it feel to go from a dominant culture, being Caucasian American, to becoming a minority as a Muslim, especially since you wear hijab? And this will be a question for all three of you.
I mean, I don't know. For me, and that was one thing that I always kind of saw too, was, even in the communities we had, like, we were mainly in an African-American community. Like, a lot of our friends are African-American, and even we have some Hispanic friends and Latino friends. And the thing is, it's like, there's never the other Caucasian Muslims, like, ever, or maybe, like I said, there's one that has a parent, like the other parent is Arab, but you don't hardly ever find one like you. And which is fine. I mean, I don't think we have to, but it is interesting. And as a child, it can be kind of weird sometimes because you don't have the same culture, you don't have the same, there is a culture to different parts of the United States, like if you come from New York, or you come from the South, or you come from Washington, wherever it is, there's a culture there. And so it's like, you still don't have, even our friends, we would all get together for Thanksgiving, and their Thanksgiving would be much different than our Thanksgiving. And so it was, I think it is very strange, and Aisha can tell you what she calls herself because of that. At times it's difficult. Like, it really is difficult to be that minority.
I don't know if it has affected me as much. I'm a very adaptable person. I've adapted to, things my husband wanted to do with our, I've done a lot of traveling and different things. I mean, just becoming Muslim most likely is because my husband, we went to Saudi Arabia, and he converted, and then I learned about Islam. And so for me, I just tried to join. I'm just so grateful that Allah put me in that group with Anissa and Zarina Awad and Frida and Sylvia and you know, it was the best thing that could happen. And I always just felt that I was a part of it.
Well, and one thing to point out too that was so amazing about that group is you had Shia, you had Sunni, you had every, you know, different ethnic groups in there, and it was such a Mod Podge, you know, but everybody loved each other. You know, everybody just wanted to be better and be, you know, good Muslims and support each other. So it's really wonderful.
And we're all still friends to this day.
Exactly. And growing up, being like a third generation child of that community was great because you just see everyone, you're like, oh, this is just, it's a different version of a community that you get to see. Because it's different than like if you're in a masjid, it's different than if you're at a halakha. Like it's when it's just that, like that was like my Muslim home growing up. And those are like the connections that were great. And like what I see, like I grew up around very strong Muslim women. So when I wore hijab, it was just like, oh, that's what you do. Like it wasn't an issue. It wasn't there wasn't anything around it. I was like, this is what strong women who do amazing things in the world wear. And it's a sign of that. It wasn't of, oh, you're belittled or oppressed or like you have to do this or anything. It wasn't a challenge. Alhamdulillah, I've never had an issue with it. And that was because that was the standard that I grew up with. And like with the whole culture and dominance, for me, I've never felt like a minority in the world as a culture. It's more of that minority concept was when in the Muslim community, or especially in like the whole masjid community. When I would go out in the world, I never felt different because I never would put it in a space. Like I work in the fitness industry, and when I'm there, like no one comments on it. No one comments on hijab or anything like that. Like some people are like, aren't you warm working out like with hijab and everything? But other than that, like I've never made it an issue. And you know, if you want to ask a question, you totally can. But it's just, I'm just here and I'm just who I am. And so I've gone very comfortable. So honestly, if I'm in a classroom and another hijabi's there, it's like, what happened? Like it's not normal for me. And so I've grown up being like, well, if I'm the only hijabi, like I'm 100% comfortable, like I don't have an issue. But when another person who comes in who's like Muslim, it's different. And it takes a little bit of like, it's not a bad thing, but it just is, it's not as comfortable at times. It was like, oh, where do I sit now? Because I'm so used to being the only one, and I know how I present as Muslim, and then like I know that could be a little bit different. So how do we all fit together? So it's a really interesting parallel.
Let me ask you a question, Aisha. How much gratitude do you have? Like you inherited La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that your grandparents had to go find it,
Mm-hmm.
and you inherited it. How does that feel?
It's amazing. And I think the more that I learn about Islam, the more grateful I get. Because the more I learn about everything, the more I learn about, oh, how much like the whole Big Bang Theory is in our Quran. Like there's just like these little things that you learn. You're like, okay, we can prove the existence of God when we go through physics to an extent. Like, or just so many things that we learn through Islam, but just how we understand the world. Like for me, like when we look at the Quran, it's about understanding who our creator is and beginning to understand creation. I get to understand who I am. I get to understand who you are, what our tendencies are going to be. How do we combat that? How do we live efficiently and productively? And so I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity that I got that so early on in life. And then I think we all have that moment where we take on Islam for ourselves and we truly get to learn and get to, okay, this is my truth. And I got to be exposed to that very young at birth. So then when I go and hear about other things, I have my background of understanding what truth is and what truth can be. So that's my comparison. When I learn other things, I'm like, but there's a gap here. But you're not answering my why. Or there's another question that shows up that you can't answer. And because I grew up in Islam, which is you know, we have space for spirituality and for faith and all of these things, which is amazing. But we also have a very strong intellectual foundation that cannot be cracked. There is the answer for almost everything you can think of, and if there isn't an answer, that it isn't for us to know. But we at least have that basis that I haven't found or seen in a lot of other faiths or a lot of other ideologies. And so I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to take me forward when I go through my career, when I go through school, because, you know, if as a science major, I don't ever have to think, oh, does science and religion go together? I'm like, they enforce it as coming from an Islamic perspective.
Alhamdulillah. So thank you for that. We have another question. Some cultures of Muslims fantasize or idealize Caucasian women and men because of their whiteness. Have you experienced that? And if so, how did you handle it? How do you handle this kind of idealizing that, you know, some people have when they meet, you know, particularly white converts?
I think, you know, for me, early on, you know, my husband converted in Saudi Arabia. You know, he was blonde hair, blue-eyed American. So, you know, we would get invited a lot, you know, just because we were a novelty, you know. But when people would say, you know, that because you're a convert, that you're going to get special blessings, or, you know, there's something special about you. I mean, I would take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we all have to take, you know, when people give you a compliment, everything with a grain of salt, because only Allah knows what's in your heart. I mean, you can be a convert and still not be a good Muslim, you know. So I think that's the only thing I've ever gotten that might feel like idolization, is that people think that you're special because you made that decision. But I mean, I believe that every Muslim needs to take their Shahada, you know, to make that conscious decision that they want to be Muslim. And even, you know, one of my sons, you know, his faith, he has really good morals, and his faith in God is strong, but not his ideas of what you should do. You know, he's at that point in his life thinking that all of the ritual things aren't that big a deal, you know. So it comes a point in your life where you have to decide that it is important to you, and that's, you know, when you should reaffirm your faith.
Yeah, and I think too, I've experienced where people are kind of intrigued, you know, when they see you, and they're like, they give you kind of that special treatment at first, where they're kind of intrigued. They want to know your story or whatever, but you don't get invited to their everyday get-togethers. You know, like I was a part of a, you know, community of teachers and things, and, you know, you would, they would talk to you and everything, but I didn't get invited to their little gatherings, you know. Or I know I was friends with people and they thought it's cool, but you don't get invited to the family picnics and stuff like that. So I think there definitely is some awe or some, you know, kind of intrigue and possibly special treatment at times, but it also comes with a different effect. Like my brother was always, you know, say the surah, say it. Can you say the surah? You know, like always tested and things like that. And, you know, even my son who, his name's David, be like, well, why don't you have a Muslim name? You know, going to the mosque and always being asked those types of things. So there's, I think, always sometimes two sides to everything.
What advice would you give converts? Because often, I mean, I know when my oldest was born, I had two questions would cross my mind. One, who's she gonna marry? And two, how am I gonna teach her this religion? So what advice would you give, you know, converts on raising kids? So we'll start with the matriarch.
Okay, you have to repeat the question. I was looking at the chat.
Yeah, see, that's the problem looking at the chat.
I know. Yes.
So what advice would you give a convert in terms of raising kids, of passing Islam down your lineage? What advice would you give to someone?
I know that, converts generally are very zealous. I don't think any other religion is any different. And I think that many times, we met one young man who thought, okay, if you dress your little boy in a thobe and you take him to the mosque with you all the time and you teach him how to pray, that they're going to be a good Muslim. That doesn't make a good Muslim. You have to practice your religion, number one. You have to talk about Islam in your life. Make your decisions based on what God would want, and talk to your kids about that and have discussions. Like Marcy said, we used to have some of the best discussions after we prayed Isha. But one of the problems was my kids were 3 years, each of them was 3 years apart. So my son missed out on a lot of those, because by the time he was old enough to join in, my husband was so busy with his work that it didn't happen as much. So that, I think, is one of the reasons his connection isn't as strong. So as a family, and if you're only one parent, you can still do it as one parent. Just talk to your kids about the beauty of Islam, beauty of God, what God has given us. Like Aisha said, science is wonderful to show everything that God's made for us and how beautiful it is. Moral values, be a good moral person, teach your kids good morals. And, that's just part of life. Islam is a way of life. We have to remember that. It's not just the mosque. I mean, to be honest, I don't even go to the mosque that much. I went to a new mosque recently, and their khutbah reminded me of the ones 30 years ago, and it was given by a young person. This is bid'ah, this is, can't do that, you can't do this. You have to have things that are uplifting. Talk to your kids about, and that's what I love about Good Tree. The organization Marcy's with, they teach the beauty of Islam, the beauty of the words, the beauty of the surahs, and the mercy of God.
Sister Marcy? Since you were the product, I mean, this is because you were the product of that. So, the question says, what advice would you give converts? Now, what did your parents do for you? They say, this was special.
Yeah. I would say, exactly what my mom said, and, really have those conversations. And like she's saying, when you are struggling, share those with your kids and share them how you're talking to God. And I would say, as a parent, continue learning as well. Like, don't focus only on your kids' knowledge and your kids' learning. You have to be that example. So, make sure that you're learning, you're connecting to God, because if you're doing that, you're going to be that role model for them. You can, my son, he was wanting to go to a school, and it was during Ramadan, that Ramadan was coming. He couldn't decide which school he wanted to go to in the fall. And I just told him, I said, look, Allah's going to give you the best choice, but you got to trust him. So let's make dua that whichever school is better for you, it's going to happen. And I said, okay, can you do that? And he was all gung-ho, he's like, okay. So we made that dua during Ramadan. And then in the fall, he got put in the school he didn't want to go in. And he was like, I can't believe this. This is horrible. And he was so upset. And he went through the year, and he had a great year. He joined the drama club. He was in a play. He had amazing friends. It set him up really well for high school. And I got to say, look, do you remember when you asked God to give you what was better for you, not what you wanted? And see what happened? He was like, yeah, I remember now. And so it's like helping your kids make those correlations, just throughout their life, and just keep reminding them. Those are the things that they're going to remember. Hopefully, I hope. But, just keep reminding them that, well, God knows better. Just keep making those du'as and make the du'as with them. Make sure, and it's okay. Like I tell my kids, say your prayers in English. It's okay. Like ask for what you want. Have that personal connection with God. Whatever you want to talk to him about it. And not just learning du'as that are in Arabic that they recite, but those are great too, but also make sure you have that personal connection. So I think the personal connection, the asking the questions, being a role model, and just, I think for converts especially, you all found God. Trust that your kids will find God too, and let them ask those questions. Like I see a lot of parents who maybe were raised Muslim who get so scared when their kids start asking weird questions. They're like, oh, they're not going to be Muslim. No, I mean, it's the right religion. There's no way about it. Like, you don't be concerned that they're going to find something weird out, or it's, let them discover. So I think that's kind of what I have.
All right, so Aisha, you have 2 generations of this question. What helped you that your parents and your grandparents, because your father's a convert.
Yeah.
We didn't even get to that part yet, but your father's a convert. So you have 2 generations of what the questioner is looking for. What did your parents do, your grandparents do that helped you with your walk?
I think exactly what they both said. It was creating that space where it was also just a part of life. It was just something that was just ingrained in everything that you did and understood, that it didn't seem different and it didn't seem weird. Like, okay, there's my life and then there's my religion. It was a part of it. The standards that we had in our household, we didn't always think of them as, oh, these are my parents' rules. It was, this is the Islamic standard and this is what we uphold. And then just, I think developing that personal and intimate connection with God is so important. So it doesn't feel far away. It doesn't feel like, oh, God is like, so I can't reach and I can't get there and I can't ask these questions. And I just have to have this like blind faith that it's like, I can't get close to you because you're so superior and too far away. It's like, no. Like Allah is always with you. And how can you develop that one-on-one of, okay, I'm having this issue, or I'm very angry, and just being like, I'm just gonna tell God that, like, hey, I'm angry, or hey, I'm sad, or hey, I don't really understand, or I really need you, or asking for what you need and what you want, and just being able to create that. For me, I grew up and I just always felt like I had this instilled relationship with Allah where I was just like, it wasn't, I was like, oh, Allah has my back. Like, that's not a question. And so being able to move through life with that, of just knowing, okay, that's bring up with my family. Like, I never felt weird growing up with non-Muslim relatives. It was just like, okay, this is just a thing. We didn't seem different. It was just, okay, we might have different belief systems right now. And we think a little bit differently, but that doesn't make you less of my family. That doesn't make me less of a person in the world. It doesn't change how I relate to people. It shows me my Islam brings, okay, how do you relate to human beings? What character should you uphold of caring for people, being nice to people, just treating them with amazing respect and kindness at all times? And so having those values just always there, I think, was the biggest thing. And then asking any questions that we had, just understanding that my parents, they didn't ever seem like they were afraid that we would leave Islam. Because if they were afraid that we would leave Islam, then there was something that wasn't settled for them. And then that wasn't settled for us. And so, of course, that's always going to be a fear and something, because, people
it is a fear. It is a fear,
but it wasn't like,
especially those boys out there. That's a fear.
Yes, but for me growing up, it wasn't like, oh, I can't do something, or I can't ask something, or I can't whatever, because they're going to be afraid that I don't believe this. Because, as a kid, like, you might not understand things. You might be like, oh, well, something else looks a little bit easier because I don't know if I really want to deal with all of that. But then you grow older and you're like, oh, I understand why we have all these systems in place and all of that. It just all fits together. And every time as I grow and as I get older, more things make sense. More things get put in together, because not everything's going to make sense when you're like 7, because you're like, some things are like, okay, You need to be an adult to possibly understand exactly how this fits in your life. You can understand the concept, but not understand exactly the application.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to get down to the last, a lot of dua. Yes. And I would say, shout out to, Sister Anissa, Sister Zarina, Sister Frida, as a former, Phoenician. You're blessed to have people like that. And, Sister Zarina, Allah Yahumma, you're blessed. I mean, we were just talking about Sister Zarina last night. Alhamdulillah, get blessed to have, like you said, beautiful, strong women around you who make Islam, it's very normative, as they don't come across as, it's harmed them in any way. They're not victims of Islam. They were empowered by the deen, and you were able to see it. A couple of the last questions were, tell me about Good Tree.
So Good Tree is a nonprofit organization that was founded by a lady. Well, it was a couple of different ladies who actually got together and founded it. But our scholar her name is Dr. Nadia Katranji. She's from Syria. And, what we say is we believe truth is awakened, not given. And what I mean by that is you can't force feed somebody their Islam. They have to discover it for themselves. And Good Tree is a place where we try to provide those programs where people can do that. So it's very, a lot of our most of our programs are all centered around the Quran. So whether it's learning what the surahs mean to you, how do you take them on, how do you put action items, in your life for what God wants, or we're doing a lot of online courses on how to learn Arabic so that you can read the Quran for yourself. Because I was fascinated to learn that, Arabic has these root words, and you have the word insan, which means human, but the root of it is to forget and to be social. Anasa and Nasia. And it's like that creates a whole new world of what the human is. Oh, I'm forgetful and I love to be social. So, I mean, the Quran is so much richer than what we converts or American English speakers get from the translation. When you get to learn those root words, when you get to learn the grammar behind it, it really does open a whole new world and a whole new understanding of what Allah's message is and what he really wants from us. So all of our programs are founded in that, and we primarily work with teens and adults currently.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that you all are starting something, because every generation should build on the one previous. So, a lot of, when converts come in, it is a very home, almost grassroots connection with people. You're just looking for other converts who you connect to, your kids can play with and grow up with. And so to see, the next generation go ahead and build institutions, institutionalize Islam. And it's not as much of a small circle thing. Now you're creating institutions that broaden things out, that invite more people. Because one of the things we've realized is that when we started we thought it was just converts who were having some of these issues, social issues, not knowing where can you hang out, where can you just meet people in an organic way. And then, Sister Filson Musa, who's our vice president, she's the second generation Somali. She's here. She was saying, we have some of the same issues. And so it kind of opened my eyes that, I just thought it was just converts who struggle with this stuff. So it's good to institutionalize, Islam in America. So thank you for, telling us about Good Tree. And thank you for the Arabic lesson. Alhamdulillah.
I go on and on if you like me.
Alhamdulillah. No, it's good.
I think, Brother Malik, I love what you point out. And I think that's one thing as I've gotten older that I realize and understand, some of the struggles I was sharing with you. What I've understood now is it's everyone's struggle. Like everyone doesn't feel like they belong. Everyone feels like they're, it's woe is them, or they, all the challenges that we have, we think are so only me, and it's so not. You know, it's a humanity challenges, but yet we keep it to ourselves, so we think we're the only one.
So in closing, and again, I want to thank you all. Thank you, the 3 generations of Muslims, 3 generations of Muslims in America who are indigenous to America. It's a beautiful thing. Sister Karen, when you took Shahada, did you envision this day?
Well, my Shahada story is really interesting in that the mosque that we were going to was having a lot of issues, and they were not really open to women speaking either. And so there was some things going on. They said, if you wanted to be able to speak at this one meeting at the mosque to say what your opinion was, you had to recite the Shahada first, which was interesting, So I knew that ahead of time, and I had to make a decision whether I was going to do it, because that would mean that I was a Muslim. I mean, I had been going to the mosque with, our group of friends, and my husband was Muslim and he was involved in the mosque. So when I wanted to speak and I got the microphone and I said my Shahada, you could hear the gasps. Sister Anissa and Zarina well, I don't know how old Zarina was, but Anissa remembers it. So, a lot of the ladies knew that I had just taken Shahada. It was really interesting. But I already had 3 children, So I don't know whether I actually thought about grandchildren at the time. I just knew that it was a good move for our family, that it was going to enhance our family life and make my life better, and it felt good. It felt really good.
I want to touch on that before we go. You said you knew it would be good for your family. And oftentimes, I think when people think like, should I become Muslim, not become Muslim, they don't often think that maybe this would be good for your family. And then maybe, Allah will give you some openings because you're doing something that's good. Oftentimes we don't talk about that. We're so individualistic, like I don't feel, this is my truth. I have my truth. But when you made a decision, obviously for your own soul, but you're saying like this will be good for my family.
Mm-hmm.
Alhamdulillah. That's I've never heard it put like that.
It was my husband, when he became Muslim, it was very good for our family, because I said earlier that his family is prone to alcoholism, and he was an alcoholic. And the minute he became Muslim, he quit drinking. And that was a savior for our family. And when we were, I had 2 girls. I knew that if you want to raise your children Muslim, they have to have a good role model. The mother has to be a good role model. And so I had to make a decision. Were we going to butt heads, for who knows how long? Or was I going to, learn about this religion and make a decision? And I was, Allah guided me. He showed me that was the way to go. Alhamdulillah.
Hats off, kufi's off. Alhamdulillah. Hey, alhamdulillah. Like I appreciate it. And I think we need to hear stories like this. It's almost like I grew up in the church, and people would testify, and they would give their testimonials, and their testimonials would reaffirm your faith. And when a person would say, look at what Allah has done. Look what God has done for me. I was here, I was there, and it does something for you. When you see like how the greatness of Allah to bring people from disobedience to obedience, it's amazing to hear these stories. I thank you very much. Sister Marcy, your parting words.
I just want to thank you so much for organizing this and for having us, and and thank you for letting us tell you a little bit about Good Tree, just to hopefully maybe everybody can benefit too. And I really pray that, you know, everybody on this call and everybody involved, that we all, inshallah, can experience our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and, you know, be that continuing beacon and source for goodness throughout, you know, mankind. You know, I always pray that, you know, Allah, that they have a connection, that my kids and my grandchildren and so on and so forth, they just have that great connection to God, and that they're good people in this world. And, you know, I pray that for all of you on today, and I hope that you'll pray that for all of us. And, you know, that our organizations can continue to provide spaces where people can be supported and grow and come together. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sister Aisha.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This was really fun to get to share these stories, and that just opening this conversation I think is really important. And inshallah, we all benefited in some way from hearing this. And then inshallah, our stories can help inspire other people that this can happen and it does exist. And just to have that community and have that support, and know that there are people that are here to support you through this process and support you in your Islam, in your Iman, no matter who you are or where you're at.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much. You know, we read in the books of Omar radiallahu anhu, where one of his concerns for Ibn Omar was that he never tasted dunya. You know, so he never tasted, you know, not being Muslim. And alhamdulillah, like your family shows that concern, that, you know, one of the beautiful things your sister Marcy was saying, that Allah will, if Allah guided you to Islam, He can guide your kids too. You know, and don't you know, get bent out of shape. You know, don't become too overly concerned. Be concerned, but not overly concerned that you're trying to control something. Alhamdulillah, your all story shows that, you know, Allah guides and He answers dua. And, you know, really appreciate the word, you know, your words and your advice to people. Alhamdulillah. So we'll end with Surah Al-Asr, and we'll depart. And everybody check out Good Tree, inshallah. And we'll be looking forward to some good things coming out of Good Tree. I'm sure Good Tree's doing good things. Alhamdulillah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal-Asr. Inna alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati Jazakumullah khairan for everybody coming out. Inshallah, look for, you know, our next conversation coming, inshallah, maybe in the next couple of weeks. Inshallah, everybody have a good evening. Make dua for us, make dua for Good Tree, make dua for each other, you know, by name. Inshallah, make dua for each other by name. Sister Marcy, look like you got something you want to say.
If you don't mind, I just want to share with everybody that Good Tree is starting a weekly Quran discussion starting this Sunday, and it's free. It's online through Zoom. You can register on our website, and so it might just be an access for people to check it out. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you all very much. Inshallah, we'll see you all soon, hopefully in Phoenix once the coronavirus is over.
Yeah, inshallah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah.
Alaikum.
Alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you.